There are days that define your story beyond your life.
Welcome to 5 Minute Arrival,
the podcast where we look at the film Arrival 5 minutes at a time. I'm Robert.
I'm Sarah.
Any questions?
What do they want? Where are they from? Why are they here? This is the priority.
Our priority today is minutes 11 through 15 of Arrival, and we have with us a guest, Sean German of Next Scene Podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
And this minute begins, we're back at the university campus, as apparently Louise is the only one who went back to work. Because, she knows all this is happening, right? So she remembers it from the future. She's not that plussed by it. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Non-plussed is a word, so yeah. Mm-hmm. She's not bothered.
Yeah.
And so we get another shot of the pavilion Lionel Gruel, which I talked about last time. And then an empty cafeteria, an empty classroom. In the script, someone has written on the board, "Aliens, see you next week," but they didn't put that in the movie.
Perfect. Yeah. It's like coronavirus in March. Told all my students, I'll see you in a few weeks. I knew I might not, but
yeah.
Certainly didn't think I'd see them in a year and a half. But
we get a long news report as we get this really slow tracking shot into Louise's office. She's watching the news on her laptop. After Tuesday's extraordinary events, the president this morning has declared a state of emergency with as many as 5,000 National Guard being deployed to the state of Montana alone. Borders are closed and flights have been grounded. Stranding millions of travelers, panic buying of gas, water, and food continues to escalate, and federal authorities have temporarily lifted all caps on overtime for law enforcement. The ATF has put a temporary ban on new gun licenses, forcing many independent suppliers of hunting equipment and firearms to close their doors to the public. 48 hours later and no further development. What's missing from this is mentions of toilet paper, as we've learned this year, and I'm not buying the gun license thing at all.
Right, that was my first thought. I'm like, the way that we know this is not American is the whole, because that would not happen. But yes, it's really hard to watch this film without thinking of Corona.
Yeah, very, very timely. I mean, just did within the first, 15, 20 seconds of this section, several things that we can reflect on. But I wondered about that, that section on the ban of new gun licenses, because while in the United States, the right to own firearms is enshrined in the Constitution, it's the Second Amendment on the federal level,
mm-hmm.
For most things, the licensing is state and local.
Right.
I own firearms, and when I registered and I got a license, it's the state where I lived, but then it's the individual sheriff approves, that the police sheriff in the town where you live actually has the sign-off ability. And I think in most cases, it's a rubber stamp. They go, okay, you've registered, you took a safety course, you paid the $50 or whatever, here's your license. But it is the local sheriff. So I don't know, if the ATF can do that. And I'm in one of the more restrictive states for buying, for getting licensed and buying firearms. There are places where I think you at least need to show an ID, but basically if you have a driver's license or student ID to show who you are, and, there's not a wanted poster of you on the wall, so, but basically, there's places where you don't even need a license. And enough people have licenses that, even if they're not granting new licenses, there's plenty of people that could buy firearms.
Yeah.
So,
right.
And this will come up. And then it kind of bookend it. There's another newscast.
Yeah.
We get a little news shot at the end. And that's one of the things that I have trouble with when I'm watching films for the first time and I don't know what's going to happen when they do this thing, and which of these news stories are just, kind of building the mood and setting the stage? Which of the news items are really going to play into the plot and are important to remember?
Which one is the supernova story from, I can't think of the title.
But Total Recall?
Total Recall, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a supernova news story that in the novel is super important. In the movie, it's they forgot about that.
Yeah. So is there, is there later going to be an instance where they need to buy, they need a handgun for some reason to work. And not even necessarily to shoot the aliens. The aliens are sick and they're here for our help, but they've got this really thick skin. And so we need blasting powder to get through their skin to give them the injection so we can save them. But all the all the gun stores are closed and they can't, they have to break in. So it's, is this going to come up later or not? And I won't spoil it for folks that haven't watched the whole film that, some of these news items are just sort of setting up the mood and the atmosphere, but some of them may play in, have kind of hint at larger aspects of the story later.
Some of them I think are even a little bit comedic, playing fun on how the news report stories.
Yeah.
Like in the...
I
very
still wish they
subtly.
had someone who was just completely wrong being interviewed, to be realistic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you mentioned toilet paper, which became a big thing early in 2020. When they say people panic buying gas and food, I mean, that can be, in this case, we're talking about maybe the most historic event in human history, first contact with alien intelligence. But absence of that contact, it could be, in my neck of the woods, it could be, it's going to snow this weekend.
Right.
I'm in New England where getting 6 inches or a foot of snow is a regular occurrence in winter. And yet people always react like they've never seen this thing before. Like, what is this white stuff coming from the sky? I need to buy every loaf of bread in the market.
Yeah. I didn't get as much snow being in Pittsburgh, but I got enough of it. So I remember those days.
Yeah. So, yeah, panic buying of food, of gas and food is like, that's not even news. Again, absent the context of why. Like, it could be it's Super Bowl weekend and the local team is participating in the game. So there's a run on tortilla chips and chicken wings, as people stock up. But then the ban on new gun licenses, that's something that doesn't happen every winter. So that is more newsworthy.
I would point out as a teacher, they accidentally are fairly accurate as to her schedule. They say 48 hours, which means her class, which the script says it is advanced linguistics, is twice a week.
Perfect.
It's Tuesday, Thursday.
Oh, right. Because
we skipped
Tuesday
a day.
and now it's Thursday.
Yeah.
So a couple other
Because it's important to have Friday off.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very much so.
Yeah. If you're a smart student, if you can get, the Tuesday, Monday, Wednesday, and Tuesday, Thursday lectures, and then kind of plan your schedule so you can have Friday off. And then even if you can get if you can load up everything like Tuesday, Thursday lectures and do like a lab Wednesday afternoon, and then every weekend's a 4-day weekend. That's advanced, colleging, advanced studenting for the, for the university student.
Since I work at a pretty working class university, it's common though, more just because they really have to balance their work schedule with their school schedules. And it's easier to tell your boss, hey, these are the 2 days a week I can't work, rather than here are all the days a week I can't work. But I don't think she's at a working class university. She's at,
University of Montreal is big. I don't know where she's supposed to be. For purposes of the plot, I assume she's in Montana or close to it.
Yeah, and speaking of Montana, because we talked a little bit about the places last time, few random interesting facts about the state. It's referred to, its nickname, as the last best place. And there's a continental divide that runs down the state.
Yeah.
It's more split than any other state. It's, of course, one of the largest states in the United States, but also the 4th least populated. Do you think they chose Montana for any particular...
Probably just because it's out. Yeah, you could have large open spaces while still being in the U.S. without being Alaska, because then it seems like it's not the U.S.
Yeah.
Because it's farther out.
Well, and people would have to, for a big crowd, for it to become like a tourist spot for people with TS clearance, they'd have to travel there. Whereas, you show up along the coast of California or, anywhere sort of the Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York City region. Yeah. Wherever you pop down, there's going to be a ton of people. There's other places other than Montana, but that's one place where aliens could show up and not immediately have a crowd.
Which actually goes to why, I think, spoilers, why China is the one most likely to go to war later in the film is because their ship landed in the middle of a city. I think all the rest of them are out in the middle of, away from things.
Yeah. Maybe they, one of the concepts in extraterrestrial communication is the fact that we have radio and television. We've just been spewing out radio waves for the past almost a century at this point, but for many decades, and kind of if an alien intelligence picked those up and was able to decipher them. And I wonder if, if these particular aliens picked up The Hunt for Red October. And they're like, this guy really wants to go to Montana. This must be a great place. We should go to Montana.
Speaking of other movies, this is where Forrest Whitaker comes in.
Hey, Forrest Whitaker.
As Weber. We'll get to his name in a moment, but I wanted to introduce him because he, among other things, I think first time I noticed him was Crying Game, but he was Cuffy in North and South. He was in Bloodsport, Body Snatchers. I just rewatched Species because I have some notes somewhere here on the TV tropes thing for the worm guy, which essentially he was one of the experts brought in that movie. And here he's bringing in Louise as the civilian expert, which is a trope of films. And, of course, recently he was Saw Gerrera in Star Wars Rebels and Rogue One.
Yeah, Star Wars connection. Yeah, I think I first saw Forrest in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Huh. He's a football player at the high school there, and then also had a good part in The Color of Money.
Yeah,
one of his early parts. He's one of the pool players that Tom Cruise comes in contact with. But he's a good actor. He's fun to watch. And then he's here. He's Colonel Weber. Yep. He's from the military.
Yeah, and he says 2 days and already the public expects us to know the answers. His name here is G.T. Weber in the story, or I think the script. His name is Richard, but still Weber.
Yeah, is this where we talk about
Max
Weber? As a comm theory person, I didn't even notice and pick up on that, even though he's a theorist that I teach. Max Weber is the father of sociology, but identifies as a historian, and he believed that for any outcome there are multiple causes, which was different from prevailing thinking at the time. He was an interpretivist, so he believed that you should study and interpret experiences rather than the positivist empiricist approach. He emphasized the importance of cultural references in religion in order to understand the origins of capitalism. His seminal work was The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Before I cite one or two things here, just some really interesting things. He was, at the beginning of World War I, kind of a German nationalist, thinking of military, and let go of that ideology later on as the war continued. He also died from pneumonia as a result of weakened lungs from the Spanish flu. So this film obviously didn't know about corona, but I was reading about how he basically died from the Spanish flu when he was only in his 50s. And I found a really interesting research article titled Language, Ethnicity, and the Nation State discusses his view of language as a way to relativize the frame of national society. So Weber saw linguistic community as constructed from Weber's rationalist, subjectivist, individualist viewpoint. Linguistic community was a result of social actions, not a prior entity, as was previously assumed. Mitsuhiro Tada writes, Central Europe in Weber's era was a battlefield of linguistic nationalism. In contrast to the national societies of the Cold War period, national borders were unstable, and ultimately the multi-ethnic empires of the region were dismantled after World War I into ethno-linguistic nation-states. Any thought on that so far? Then I want to cite one more thing.
Yes, because in our first episode we had the whole Portugal thing with the state and language going together. Last week we had a Quebec nationalist and now a German nationalist.
Yeah.
It's like a theme.
Tada also states, experience of this contemporary reality brought Weber to the core of the relationship between language and politics. A language community is an imaginary one, demarcated not by language itself but by conscious opposition against outsiders, with monolingual contexts within borders created artificially by homogenizing policies like linguistic standardization and national education. In this way, Weber felt language can be a means to domination. Any thoughts on that?
Definitely fits with this film, and I believe that's his name in the original story by Chung, and also Heisser's script. So it's definitely a choice.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how those ideas play into the different groups, the different nation states, and the different linguists that come in contact with the aliens. And we mainly spend our time in Montana with this particular group of people, but we see some of their interactions with those other groups, and that's going to become a key thing.
Separate from that is to continue a little. In, I believe it's the original story, this conversation is a lot more complicated because she corrects him on what language she translated for him. It wasn't Farsi, it was some dialect specific one, and she keeps nitpicking what he's saying, and she's a lot more talkative in that. Here she's like this subdued character who makes sense because they want us to think she's grieving. So she's quiet and doesn't talk much. Mm-hmm. But in the story, she's not like that at all. But yeah, that play of language and domination is definitely an assumption on the part of a lot of the human characters in the film, and what the film wants us to think as well as it goes forward. And could play into the end of this segment too with the, we'll get to the mistranslation.
Yeah. We do get a hint of there are, she doesn't say much, but there are things behind the things she's saying. There are things unsaid.
Yes.
And the wordplay he says you made quick work of the, and you mentioned here she does it correct when he says Farsi, but so Weber says you made quick work of those Farsi videos, and she replies, using his words, you made quick work of those insurgents.
Yeah.
So sort of the real genius factor, like, she's not just a purely academic. She recognizes the military and what they're going to use.
Yeah, she knows
what they
might kill people because of her.
Yeah, what they will use her work for. So, without saying it, she's saying a few things.
After that is when he says she's on top of everyone's list when it comes to translations. I would like to reference Jessica Coons, who is the Associate Professor of Linguistics at McGill University, Canada Research Chair in Syntax and Indigenous Languages, and she consulted on the language in the film. Because she points out, linguists are not translators, and translators are not linguists. They're two different things. Mm-hmm. They both have an interest in similar stuff, but this is on the Language Portal of Canada, 24th September 2018. She says, linguists are interested in studying the abstract and structural properties of human languages, as well as similarities and variations across languages. But linguists don't necessarily speak the language or languages they study, and plenty of linguists will tell you they're terrible at learning foreign languages. Translators, on the other hand, obviously need to be very strong in the languages they work in, but may not be interested in analyzing the nitty-gritty components of grammar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and then that makes more sense with what you said in terms of that she didn't actually, why would they go to her to translate something in Farsi? Whereas if it was...
Yeah, there's millions of people who speak Farsi.
But if it was, if it was a regional dialect or, something that was different that they didn't have a translator for, then they may need someone operating more on a theoretical level, a linguist versus a translator. That kind of explains that.
Just going to say a random fact. My great-grandma, who was born in 1909, spoke 9 different languages, and she was a translator. That was her career, and she was a single mom through the Great Depression. She raised my grandmother, and her twin was a single mom because her husband was shot and killed. He was Italian mafia. Really interesting. Every time I tell someone this, they're like, you should write a story.
You've told me this translator part. I do not remember the mafia
part. A story about this. So yeah, we're in the mafia book. It's the Angelinis. But anyway, he was shot and killed, and she gave birth to twins, almost died during childbirth, and never had any more kids. Had to find a creative way to raise twins as a woman in the 30s, and so just started learning languages and was able to work from home as a translator and built up enough clientele to own several homes and just...
In the right neighborhood in this country, you can make a lot of money doing that too, because we got enclaves of foreigners and people whose first language is something else other than English.
But the dialect thing made me remember because I knew... Even though she spoke 9 languages, there were many different Italian dialects.
Right, yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons people went to her, too, because she knew most, or at least a large number of Italian dialects. So if people needed really specific things, then she could provide it.
There's a lot of local variations in, I guess, jargon or slang that if you've just learned a language in the classroom, you're just an academic, you may not necessarily know those words or their meaning. It may not be able to translate versus a native speaker or someone who's more familiar with the local usage.
Well, speaking of jargon, we even get some here. You've already mentioned the TS clearance that he says later. Mm-hmm. He's about to mention SSBI, and the movie doesn't stop and explain what that is like some movies might. We just assume it's something. It is. It's a single scope background investigation. It includes a national agency check, local agency check, subject interview, verification of birth, citizenship, education, employment, credit, and references. I didn't confirm that it has a certain length of time, but I guess hers has 2 years left. Mm-hmm. That's why they come to her. She can not only understand languages, but she's got clearance.
It would make sense in this situation. You wouldn't want to have to go through that process if you've got someone who's in the book already. You're like, okay.
Oh, and this is where I had my notes for the worm guy thing. Named for Nico Totopoulos in 1998's Godzilla. He's a research scientist studying worms in Chernobyl that they bring in to talk about Godzilla. And then Daniel Jackson in Stargate, Alan Grant in Jurassic Park, or any of the people in Jurassic Park, really. And even Forrest Whitaker himself, as Dan Smithson the empath in Species. Experts brought in by the government to get stuff done. Of course, Louise has competition. He says, that's why I'm in your office and not at Berkeley, because there's someone else they could go to. He plays the tape for her, which... There's not much to it. A human saying, why are you here? Can you understand me? And the alien responds with its noises. It's funny, in the original story, Louise thinks the alien sounds like a wet dog shaking water out of its fur.
Nice. I forgot that one.
I like that one. She doesn't mention it to him. She's like, that's what it sounded like. But it's a lot more nuanced in the film. I compare it to the Predator or the Velociraptors in Jurassic Park. Coming back to that, with like the clicks and the low hums and various noises all put together. And the human asks, where did you come from? And the alien answers again. And Weber asks what Louise makes of it. Not much to go by so far.
She just takes a little time to process. Like she's thinking about it, which obviously.
Well, I wonder, one of the things she asks is how many. Yeah. So I wonder if she's just curious. Is there something in there that, can she discern separate voices? Something that makes her think there's multiple.
The aliens definitely have like layered sound to their voice. So if it's multiples talking a lot, like if it's a crowd, that's much different than if that's one alien making all those noises. But also she might just be curious. How many aliens? Yeah, I mean, there's definitely I'm not a linguist or a translator, so it's hard to pick out. It does sound like there's two different sounds, but it could be the same individual. Yes, saying two different phrases that sound different to my ear. That's why I like her question where she asked, did they have mouths? Yeah. That's important. They're aliens. They might not have what we call a mouth, so that noise could be coming from some like dome on the top of their head that's vibrating or some different thing.
Something coming out of their skin pores, anything.
Exactly.
That's good. I took that as an indication that she is, kind of, I don't know, thinking outside the box is a trite phrase, but I'm not sure how else to say it. Like she's asking the non-obvious questions. I think I wouldn't think to ask. Yeah. If someone's speaking, they're making some kind of sound that they have something analogous to a mouth, but maybe not. She's thinking to ask those questions that are not obvious to the layman. So then Weber asks how she would approach this, and she doesn't know. Yeah. Says it would be impossible to translate from an audio file. I would need to be there to interact with them.
And I like this part because, like you mentioned earlier, Sean, a lot of what happens in communication is what happens behind the words. And that's why she would need to interact with them. 65 to 93% of communication, depending on the research studies that you're looking at, are nonverbal. So just being present with somebody, being able to read not just what they're saying, but how they interact, what their pauses are, their tones are, how fast or slow. Partly just not to be too woo, but like just kind of energy, like how someone or how like a being is playing off of you, and none of that she's going to get from a quick audio file.
And all that's true for a discussion between two humans that speak the same language. All the nonverbal stuff or the non-literal stuff that you don't get from a recording or a transcript of the literal words. That's dealing with people that speak the same language. And then you get outside of language and outside of the same language and outside of the same species, that all those things become even more important. And I like the play. She's very smart because he's like dangling. Obviously, this is an historic occasion, and to be involved in this project, we don't know what, this may be completely secret, the kind of thing that nobody ever hears about. But if you end up in history books, this is historic. And he kind of dangles that saying, well, I could go to Berkeley. I don't need to be here. And then she comes back with, I'm just telling you what it takes to do this job. Whoever does it, this is the approach they should take. But I'm not saying it's going to be me. So she's kind of slow playing it as well, saying, someone's got to do it, but, may be me, may not be, but this is what it's going to take. She doesn't, take that bait of, when he kind of dangles Berkeley out there. Right.
So free will versus determinist question. If she does know and has seen everything, then is she, we wouldn't know this as the viewer, but is she just calm because she already
she knows he's going to show up. She knows he's going to ask, which would actually help with the thing we're going to get to at the end with the
Sanskrit.
Because she would know what word Danvers is going to choose. So she'd know he'd be wrong. Yeah. Although he's not wrong. We'll get to that.
Now, do you guys know, Robert and Sarah, do you know as podcasters that are getting deep into this movie, do we know, just kind of as the audience, what kind of background Weber has? And I ask because
the character?
Yeah, because I wonder, I took it when she asked him that question, so if you go to Berkeley, ask about the Sanskrit word for war.
Oh, like what he would know.
And I get the feeling she's not talking to Weber. She's talking directly to the other linguist. Yeah. And when Weber asks that question, the other person's going to know. Weber doesn't know to ask this question. He must have talked to someone else.
Yeah. He talked to Banks already.
That person's going to know, okay, he just came from wherever Banks is. And he's a messenger of this, and of the message. That question has a message for someone else. But I guess that's not necessarily the case. If Weber has a background in linguistics, maybe he does understand that question or the implications of it.
I think from later in the film we would get the impression he doesn't, because he doesn't pay much attention to their communication and the words they're getting.
Yeah.
But I think he does this in a few hours.
Yeah.
So he goes to Berkeley and then comes back wherever she is. So in the meantime, he could have had someone look up Sanskrit, get a dictionary, see what's right. Hell, maybe Danvers picks the word he picks because he doesn't want to go. Maybe he's like, I see what you're playing at. You can have it. You can go spend time with aliens. They're just going to infect you with weird viruses, steal you. Danvers is busy. He's probably got a family. He's got stuff going on. He's got a podcast.
He's got a linguistic podcast he's doing. He can't, he can't tear himself away.
As Weber's going to leave, she says, you mentioned Berkeley. Are you going to ask Danvers next? He says, maybe. She says, before you commit to him, ask him the Sanskrit word for war and its translation. And then we cut to another news report as Louise is asleep in her bed with an agreement on sharing scientific discoveries looks closer tonight as Russia and China join talks at the United Nations. Meanwhile, financial markets across the world are in crisis at the Dow Jones Industrial
You got this.
In crisis as the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell over 2,000 points. I think that's bad.
And it's funny, kind of, or maybe not funny, but all the parallels we've talked about and you've mentioned with the current virus situation in 2020 and the run on gas and food and toilet paper and other things. There was, in March of 2020, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell about 2,000 points in one day.
Nice.
I think it was the 8th of March, or the first or second week of March, just as these things were kicking off. And then I think at the same time, Russia and Saudi Arabia were getting into sort of a price war on oil on the international market. And, it was a big enough drop that it made headlines outside of the usual business and stock market section of the news. So 2,000 point drops in the Dow Jones Industrial Average is something that makes news.
Yeah, it's about, for those who might not really follow the Dow or have money invested in stocks, which is the majority of people. The news and politicians like to refer to the Dow Jones as being the end all be all, but most people don't actually.
I think they use it because they know we don't know what it means.
Don't actually own stock, but 2,000. The Dow is kind of fluctuated between 25 and 30,000. So it's roughly 10%, a little under a 10% drop, which in a short amount of time is big. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know when the movie is set, but the year it was released, 2016, the end of the year, the Dow closed about 20,000 at the end of 2016. So assuming that this, the film is sort of contemporaneous with when it was released, that's about a 10% drop, which is, it's business section news if the market swings 1 or 2% in a day.
Yeah.
But so a 10% swing is the kind of thing that makes it front page news, not just the business section. So it's to put it in context right now, as we're recording this, the market is about 30,000. Which go to your point, Sarah, how this is an indicator, but it's also divorced from kind of everyday life. How many people listening to this feel like you're 50% more wealthy or 50% better off economically than you were just, 4 or 5 years ago? Well, the market, or at least this one measure of the broader stock market, the industrial average has gone up 50% from 20,000 and then at another 10,000 since 2016.
Yeah, rich people have the means to profit off of catastrophe. So for a certain segment of people, coronavirus has actually made them a lot richer.
Yeah.
But for the majority of people, it hasn't. It is very news-like to use the Dow Jones as a barometer of economic success. And then, obviously the economy is more complicated than that. So it does affect other people, even if they're not invested in the Dow, if the Dow drops.
Yeah. Yeah, but then so that question, I don't know, do you want to get deeper into the question, or do we wait to ask for, because we come back at the very end after, because you're talking about the news stories, but then that's followed by Weber returns with a bit of an answer to that question on the Sanskrit word for war.
I would like to point out a couple things first. I missed this in the previous scene, but I like that there is no two-shot of Weber and Louise together, unless it's from behind her or behind him. They never get a shot of just the two of them, like an establishing shot of the room. They don't put them together. And then same with this. I like the way this scene is done because if we don't know the trailer for the film, don't know what's going to happen, this could be an alien ship outside her house coming to pick her up so that the military guy doesn't get her.
Yeah.
Like, no, we're going to use her. And it's a really nice moment until you get that. It's clear it's a helicopter outside.
Wow. That's really interesting. Like, it's one of those things that I don't have a note on it. I didn't think of it, but it explains a lot of the feeling I got.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of speaking to, directors and cinematographers and what they do and that separation of these two characters. Yeah, there's some scenes where we see, I think Weber's like standing. He's got like his hand on his hip.
Yep.
We kind of see his arm
When he comes in.
but we don't see both of them. I'm reminded of the scene from The Social Network when the Winklevoss twins go to speak with Larry Summers, the dean at Harvard, to complain that this pipsqueak has stolen their idea. And there's a lot of different camera shots in that scene. There's the two twins individually. Mm-hmm. There's shots of the two of them sitting side by side. There's Larry Summers. And then there's shots where you get all three and them sitting on opposite sides of a desk. A lot more dynamics in that scene in terms of the shots, where this is pretty simple. It's, I don't know, maybe not simple is the right word, but it's, we get her, we get him, then we get her, we get him. And again, I didn't think of it, but I got the feeling of a separation between the two. Yeah, and then as soon as you said it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what's happening, and kind of the nuts and bolts of filmmaking, kind of building a feeling.
Yeah, just like here with this is an alien abduction scene, essentially, until we know it's not. Mm-hmm. My movie nitpick for this week would be that there's no way that helicopter landed in front of her house. We've seen the front of her house. Yeah. It's a driveway with trees all around. Right. There's no room. And she has a nice lawn off to the side. We've seen that.
Not anymore.
They landed over there.
The helicopter landed. Isn't there?
Well, no, they didn't land over there.
Yeah. Is there a scene like this in Close Encounters?
With a helicopter?
Yeah, where like there's a moment where there's a bright light and you think, well, this could be the aliens, and then it turns out it's a helicopter.
Probably. I know they've done that in a few movies and X-Files did that a couple times, where like a helicopter's bright lights were mistaken for a UFO.
Definitely the light as she's approaching the door, and it's obviously nighttime. Inside is dark, but there's this, nighttime sun. There's this otherworldly light coming in through the windows.
And Weber, when she opens the door and he's just standing there in silhouette, he might as well be an alien. We don't know. He says morning. She says Colonel. And he says Gavisti. He says, he's referring to Danvers, it means an argument. What do you say it means? And she says a desire for more cows, and he tells her to pack her bags. The thing is, yes, Gavisti does mean a desire for more cows. Mm-hmm. Gavisti is not a Sanskrit word for war. The Sanskrit word for war, the primary one, is yudam, or variations of it, Yuda and Yodana. I don't know how the conjugation works. But someone who goes to war, second Star Wars connection for this episode, is Yodha. So I'm pretty sure Yoda, and I don't think I knew this before, gets his name from Sanskrit word for war, which is fun. But there are lots of Sanskrit words for war, including Samara, Abhimara, Sangrama, Abhyagama, Sampata, and variants like Abhisamada, Rana, and Vigraha. Not Gavisti. I don't know if this is a mistake on the filmmaker's part, a mistake from the internet that they took and thought was real, or she is fucking with Danvers and with Weber just to see what happens. Which I like the last one as an idea, is that Danvers fell for her trick, because she asked something and he thought she was trying to be clever. He tried to get around it, picked the wrong one, and she wins.
So a couple of things. How did Weber know
to
choose her? She answers and he says, pack your bag. He doesn't know what the Sanskrit words for.
Maybe he's messing with her too. Maybe Danvers is just like, I'm busy. It's like, we gotta tell her something.
Well, that's where I started to wonder, like, was the question meant and understood purely by Danvers and Weber's just sort of a messenger, or does he kind of get?
Yeah, does Weber even understand?
But I also get the feeling like he's already picked her. The fact that he didn't show up to tell her you didn't get the job. Like the fact that he's here.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, why would he come back? Yeah.
But he may just be interested in, oh, by the way, I passed along your message that you obviously sent to Danvers through me, and this is what he said. And at that point, it doesn't really matter what she says in response.
No.
That the fact
the helicopter landed among those trees, that's endangering people's lives. Yeah. They want her.
I've applied for enough jobs to know they don't call you back when you didn't get the job. Or at least they don't call me back.
Yes. At the least, you get a form email. At the most.
At the most, you get a form saying,
At the most.
please leave our HR department alone and stop asking. You didn't get
Yes.
the job.
They certainly don't bring a helicopter.
No.
Yeah.
I think they should.
Fly to the people's house, tell them, no, you didn't get the job.
At least it'd be cool. You'd
It's
feel
an
a little
experience.
better. Yeah.
Show up in the middle of the night, make them think they're being abducted by aliens. Great.
Like, no. Just...
Yeah.
And so this segment ends with her saying, all right, give me 20, she's going to say minutes, obviously. And we'll get to that next time.
Pack your bags.
As Weber starts walking away from her already. Back to the helicopter.
We're left to wonder which bits of this part, are coming back. Assuming kind of a setting up as if we haven't seen the film.
Yeah, do
already.
the aliens want cows?
Yeah.
We don't know.
If you're on first watch, you're the first time through this. It's a bit of a callback. She mentions this question and he comes back with a response. Like, oh, it's come up twice. Probably the Dow Jones Industrial Average will probably not come up again.
No.
But this question of meaning.
Now, it's interesting with this translation thing at the end with Gavisti. She might be purposely saying wrong things, just like she does with the kangaroo story later.
Yeah.
Because linguists know that's a false story, but they tell it anyway.
Yeah.
It even says that I don't know if it says it in the script, but in the story,
In the
it
story
says
it does. Yeah.
She purposely tells that story knowing it's wrong, because it makes a point. So she might be playing with people. She's that smart, which is good to know.
Yeah. I found that there was another implication in terms of, you mentioned there's different words for war in Sanskrit. And we have war, you can have a disagreement, you can have an argument, you can have, we have kind of different words for those sort of things.
Yeah.
There's also an implication of the way language shapes our thinking, how you think of something when a label has been applied to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And kind of she's shown, again, that thinking outside the box with the question about, do they have mouths? She's kind of shown that she can kind of get away from things.
Yeah, and even if we assume her translation here is correct, and this is the word for war and its thing, she's also thinking less about what is the definition and why is the definition.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are people going to war? So she's more useful for the military then. And that she's going to try to figure out what do the aliens want, how do we talk to them, what can we get from them.
That's one of the fun things that I do with my students in discussing the challenge of communication is I'll just choose any 4 words that I feel like that day, and I'll say, write down what you think of when you hear the word love, or how do you define the word love? And then I'll say, how do you define flag? How do you define dog? And you'll get many, many answers in the class for one simple word. Or I'll say, everyone think of a dog. And then ask them, what did you think of? Oh, a German Shepherd. I thought of a lab. I thought of my little poodle. I thought of whatever. And when we think about how we communicate and how many words we use in a given day and how just the word itself can call different images, emotions, feelings, perceptions, and then how easy it is to get into arguments or fight with people about things when even just our very basic words, we're going to process them, think about them differently.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Well, also because language it's a shorthand. Words are, we can have a long definition of what a thing is. We could speak like Ents, where sentences go on for days, but we have these, this a shorthand that we, assign a word to a concept or a thing. And then, we can forget, we can kind of get caught up in the shorthand and just think of the word, but it's helpful every once in a while. And particularly if you're trying to converse with alien intelligence, to remember that the word is just a stand-in for this larger concept. I think it's an important part that it's not as useful to translate the alien language and know what words they are saying as it would be to know the concept. What is it they want? What is it what is their experience? Those, that's a more complex thing, but that's going to be more useful. Eventually, it'd be good to know an alien language and be able to translate word for word, but it's going to be more useful to know intentions, emotions, experiences, the things that language is a stand-in for.
Yeah, which again, that's why she's going to need to be present.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. To understand what tone do they take? What do they think of the person they're talking to?
Yeah, and to go back to Corona, again, we're seeing increases this year, especially with younger people of depression, anxiety, the whole Zoom fatigue thing.
Yeah.
Because like, even though you can talk to people and have meaningful relationships, there are people who are even married, I believe, whose entire relationship has been online and they've never even met face to face. But there is something that's lost, and is, I was going to say especially for extroverts, but honestly that's not even true, because I was reading some research that said introverts are suffering at as high rate, sometimes even more than extroverts with the pandemic, which
Well,
would
Zoom
seem
stuff's
to...
probably worse for introverts because
Yeah.
it's scheduled.
Mm-hmm.
So your anxiety has a deadline.
Yeah, you need to be present for certain aspects of
Mhm.
communication that without it can be. And obviously that's not the same for everybody, and that's not to say, again, you can't have meaningful online relationships, because clearly
No,
people
if your
do, but-
context starts, say you're on online relationship, it's a different context and you don't expect things. But if you went backward into having to talk on Zoom, it's going to
Yeah.
affect it a lot. We'll get a lot more about the alien language and how they don't get lost in concepts as they're talking because of the way they talk. But in later episodes, in the meantime, Sean, where can people hear you get lost in complex thoughts?
My current show is Next Scene Podcast. We're at nextscenepod.com, Next Scene Pod on the social medias, and we have a Facebook listeners group, the Jelly of the Month Club. A reference back to a previous film we covered, of course, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. That's where I do a lot of my talking. And if you want to know about my other guest appearances and what other podcast stuff I have going on, if you go to catandshawn.org, that's sort of my main site. And it's cat, C-A-T, and Sean, S-E-A-N.org. And that links to my podcast as well as guest appearances such as this one.
And one show Sean has been on as a guest several times was my The Room Minute with co-host Allison Waddell, where we talked about The Room 1 minute at a time, and that has just returned from hiatus in December.
Welcome back.
And you can hear my podcast life as a playlist where I tell my life story to the backdrop of top 40 songs that influenced me, along with sometimes some social and political commentary as well. And you can follow Life as a Playlist on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Yeah, that just happened.
Thank you for listening.
Follow the show on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at 5 Minute Arrival.
Or go to lemmingdrops.com for links.
I used to think this was the beginning of your story.